Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Cisco Optics podcast, where we talk about pluggable optics for networks. Coherent optics have been the go-to solution for high-end optical transport systems for years. Eventually, these optics were modularized, and with recent advances in DSP design and optics manufacturing, this technology is now available in small, form-factor pluggable modules. In March of 2021, Cisco recognized the importance of this technology and acquired the industry's leader, by far, in this space, Acacia Communications. This is episode 21, and we continue our conversation with Tom Williams. Tom joined Cisco through the Acacia acquisition in 2021. We get into Acacia's unique approach to making coherent optics. Tom leads marketing efforts for the Acacia Coherent Optics team that was acquired by Cisco in March 2021. Tom has spent over 20 years developing optical transmission equipment ranging from 10 gig to 1.2 terabit. He participates in a variety of coherent standardization activities in OIF, IEEE, and Open ROADM, and is co-chair of the OpenZR Plus MSA. Tom spent nearly 15 years in various management roles at Optium, where he participated in the company's 2006 IPO and 2008 acquisition by Finisar. Tom joined Acacia in 2015, where his role has included corporate and product marketing responsibility, as well as contributing to product roadmap definitions. Now that's what I call startup experience. Please follow us on Apple Podcast or subscribe on whatever podcasting platform you use. We're actually part of the Cisco Podcast Network. Check out our blog at blogs.cisco.com and search on hashtag Cisco Optics Blog. All one word, no hyphen and no spaces. You'll find podcast episode notes with timestamps there. For our YouTube playlist, go to youtube.com and search on Cisco Optics. And for product information, go to cisco.com/go/optics. And now, join me as I talk with Tom Williams. So you mentioned both silicon and silicon photonics. So was that like a two-pronged approach to solving some of the problems?
Yeah, I mean, I think it really is a big portion of what has made Acacia unique. I think it's becoming more common today, where I think silicon photonics is more widely used in this space today. But I think if you go back 10 years ago, Acacia was very unique in both being a merchant module vendor who was developing their own DSP, right? Most of the module vendor, when I was at Finisar, we were buying a DSP from someone who was focused on developing chips, and then we would integrate it into a module. Acacia was different in that they were developing those chips themselves and supporting the module design as well. But also, the investment into, believing that, it was the right time for silicon photonics. And I think they sort of align on silicon, but they're two different prongs to the strategy, or two different legs to the chair that are both kind of. We get asked the question all the time in terms of, what was the bigger factor in Acacia's success? Was it the DSP or the silicon photonics? And I think a lot of us go back and forth, right? On any given day, you might have a different sense, but I think they're both really, they've both been really key to the success. And, I think we've been able to do things. We talk a lot about, having the ability of the guy designing the silicon photonics can walk over and talk to the guy designing the DSP and figure out how to optimize and make the right kind of trade-offs, or figure out what's critical in his design. I mean, there is a great efficiency that comes from having all of those capabilities and being able to, work through those problems. I mean, it's actually interesting. I see a strong similarity to that, kind of moving it up a level with what we're able to do now as a part of Cisco. Where now, it instead of it being at the component level, it's now you have all this optics expertise, and you have the Acacia team and the Luxtera team and the Lightwire team, and you've got the system experts, and you've got, the
Hmm.
you can get all these people together and understand the different trade-offs and everything. I think that's, I see some similarities uh, in that model between, obviously the boundary of where you're thinking of the model changes, but I think there's some commonality in that approach.
Yeah, I think it's really nice because at the end of the day, the problems to be solved are oftentimes very system level problems. But then, being down at the optical layer, we have solutions that can affect, you know, that several layers up, whatever problem it is to be solved. So that's really nice that we're all in the same house now.
Yeah, I think, and every time you draw these boundaries, and it creates some level of inefficiency, right? And so I think being able to just have a direct conversation about what whether it's the component guy who's having a conversation to say, okay, what are the real problems at the system level, or it's the system guy saying, okay, well, you know, what can you do to help me solve this problem, right?
Hmm.
It just, I think there's an efficiency that can be had there. And certainly I think Acacia has benefited from that at between the different components in the subsystem, but I think there's also the potential for uh, some of that efficient. It it'll just make our products better, right?
Hmm.
I think just having that kind of input is really useful. We've always strived for it, but I think we can get a little bit more transparently now.
Getting back to the silicon photonics approach, what what was it that drove that approach to just the photonic or the optics portion? So putting aside the emphasis on the DSP and the silicon, what like why why was it necessary or extremely beneficial to go silicon photonics and not just do traditional packaging structures?
Yeah, I think it was the recognition that a coherent interface is made up of a lot a lot of individual elements, right? A lot, if you think about, because coherent interfaces are generally doing modulation, whereas most direct detect is just doing amplitude modulation.
Hmm.
Coherent interfaces are typically doing both amplitude and phase. So you've got, modulation in I and Q, and have what is called nested Mach-Zehnder modulators. So instead of just having a single Mach-Zehnder, you've got two Mach-Zehders and then an outer Mach-Zehnder around that. So they're much more complicated uh, structures. You've got elements for doing polarization control because you're polarization multiplexing. There's just our original picks had over 50 elements to them, right? And so the benefit of silicon, one, that you can do a lot of that in silicon, and you don't need to use free space optics to do like some of the polarization control and everything, is really helpful. But also the the higher the better control that you have over the silicon process, and the repeatability and the higher yields and everything, because they're such complex devices. um, you're able to do put a lot of these functions onto a single device, and make a pick that has a lot of different functionality on it. I think, to me, it comes down to, you see over and over again, you can look at a problem and you can say, okay, well, here's the reasons why that won't work. And that's what most of the industry was doing at that point, right? They were looking at silicon and saying, okay, well, here's why silicon won't work in that application. And I think what the team at Acacia did is they looked and they said, well, but it's got all these benefits. If I can figure out how to make it work and how to get the performance out of it, let's go solve that problem. And I think it was a great way to approach the situation, to say, look, we know that we've got a benefit if we can solve all of the different challenges. And because you've got all of the capabilities, in house, they were more able to do that. And ultimately, really have shown that you can get excellent performance, right? I think we don't even initially the silicon photonics was introduced in originally was the CFP module was the first one to use the silicon photonics,
Hmm.
and
Okay.
the main benefit there was size and power and everything to address kind of a metro application. But ultimately we moved to using silicon photonics for everything that you can achieve, the highest performance in the industry with silicon photonics, and you don't. It's just a question of approaching that problem from how do I optimize the design for this solution, as opposed to can I plug this solution into the way I'm doing things now, right? And I
Hmm.
think it really is just the approach. And I think a lot of this does go back to, when I talked a little bit about the process and how the team at Acacia approaches problems. Like after I was here for a few months, like it really was very clear to me that there is a different way of doing things here that is repeatable, because it gets to the way decisions are made, it gets to the way problems are solved. I think it's just a really healthy way of doing things.
So you said um, prior to the CFP, so it was actually individual components, not silicon photonics. So,
Yeah, Acacia's earliest products were using individual components. So if you go back to the first 100 gig 5x7 module, it was using uh, lithium niobate modulators and discrete components and
oh
everything. It was the
wow.
CFP module was the first time that the team introduced the silicon photonics.
So it's not like it's impossible in principle to do it, but I can imagine if you're using these lithium niobate modulators, like it's never going to fit into a QSFP form factor, right?
Yeah, I think most of the industry recognized. I think the two different approaches was silicon photonics or indium phosphide. Um,
Hmm.
and I think if you go back to the 2013, 2014 timeframe, I'd say most of the industry was on the indium phosphide. And there's been successful indium phosphide products on the market as well, right? It's not that you can't address, every, I like to say every company has their own toolbox that they
Hmm.
work with, and, their own set of solutions. I think we found our toolbox to be very effective.
Hmm.
But there are other paths, and in some applications, the indium phosphide's been a successful way to approach the problem as well.
Sorry for
So I
people.
think integration was definitely necessary, right? You certainly couldn't have stayed with the lithium niobate of 10 years ago and achieve the kind of compact form factors that we have today.
Okay, so they're both approaches to integration. Can you explain what are the differences between these two approaches, indium phosphide and silicon photonics?
Yeah, I mean, to me, I think there's um, two big differences. One, uh, silicon leverages the existing fab infrastructure, right? And takes advantage of being able to utilize that infrastructure. Sure, there again, it gets to there's some things that you need to work through in order to do that. But it allows you to have a fabless model, so it creates some different dynamics in terms of your ability to kind of scale up and down and everything. Whereas indium phosphide, you kind of have that you tends to be provided by vendors that have an indium phosphide fab, and that just creates some overhead and everything, and it can have some cost benefits if you own the fab and your fab is full and all of that. But that's one trade-off. The From a technical kind of implementation perspective, I think the big trade-off comes down to indium phosphide. You can can do the laser in indium phosphide, right? So you
Hmm.
can have the same material ultimately. You could, a lot of coherent aren't necessarily monolithic, but you could monolithically do a laser with a module. A lot of 10 gig transceivers do that, where
Hmm.
where it's all
Okay.
monolithic. And
So
so
that's so you can avoid
it's
having
very
to fiber couple the
exactly.
or
So
put a
it's
lens on
it's
the laser.
That's right.
Yeah.
So it's very efficient from that perspective. But the downside of indium phosphide is that it's very temperature sensitive. It usually has to be controlled on a thermoelectric cooler,
Mm.
and you don't want something that's on a thermoelectric cooler to be very close to something generating heat like a DSP. And so that's sort of the trade-off there. On the silicon side, you can't do the laser into or at least the gain in silicon. And so you generally have some fiber coupling to come from the laser, but the silicon is much less sensitive to thermals, and you can actually, it took us to kind of our latest generation to fully take advantage of that, where we now co-package the DSP with the PIC and the drivers and TIAs and everything. That's all in one package, and so you can get really good RF connections between those devices, and you can build them on a standard electronics assembly line and all of those things, and then but then you have to do the optical coupling, and so that ends up being kind of the trade-off is, do you want your high-speed optics sort of paired with the DSP, or do you want it paired with the photonics? And I think that's the biggest trade-off in terms of the technical approaches between the two.
Sorry. Can you say that one more time? Okay. Oh, sorry. First of all, you mentioned PIC and integration. So were you saying that the PIC and the silicon can actually be like on the same substrate or something, like when they're packaged together? Is that what you meant?
So yeah, we actually package the DSP and the PIC in on the same substrate in one package,
And then they're
and
like
it
wire
with
bonded
with
to each
drivers.
other,
Yep.
or okay.
Yeah, yeah. So that allows you to really, really get both really good performance, as well as from a manufacturing perspective, it's much more scalable.
Okay. But the indium phosphide approach would be what? You could actually have the DSP monolithically integrated with the photonics?
Not the DSP. The generally with indium phosphide, the DSP is in a separate package
Okay. So that's still
from the
separate.
optics. Yeah.
So the DSP is still going to be all silicon,
Yes.
not
Yes.
not a 3.5.
Yes.
Okay. So what would be the indium phosphide approach then? How would packaging look much different?
So there, um, generally, the indium phosphide is usually in some sort of gold box, and you can do a lot of it. You can in indium phosphide, you can put the laser and the modulator and the driver and the TIA. And so it's sort of like you have everything but the DSP in indium phosphide. You have everything but the laser in silicon.
Mm,
Is sort of the trade-off.
okay.
So in both cases, you kind of have two components. There's hermeticity uh, trade-off. Generally the indium phosphide usually has to be in a hermetic package. Silicon can get away without being in a hermetic package. Um, so there's some other trade-offs like that, but the biggest architectural difference is, do you couple the high-speed optics with the DSP, or do you couple the high-speed optics with the laser? Is the thing that
Okay.
is sort of first and foremost.
Okay. Oh, by the way, PIC is photonic integrated circuit.
Integrated circuit. Yeah,
Okay.
I
So
tend
just so people
tend to
know.
throw around a lot of acronyms, but yeah, photonic integrated circuit. So that is the silicon photonic component that, when I talked about having 50, it's got
Hmm.
multiple modulators and photodiodes and all of the elements for all the polarization control of everything that all the high speed
Hmm.
optics.
And is there a power consumption advantage as well to integrating them on silicon rather than individual components like the pre-CFP days?
Silicon tends to be a little bit lower power, largely because you don't need the tech, the
Mm.
thermoelectric cooler. You know, I think it in some applications that's the bigger part. I actually don't think in most applications the power is the primary reason today. I
Mm.
think maybe at one point it wasn't, and I think it's an edge like in 400ZR where we're targeting QSFP DD form factors.
Hmm.
I think most of the vendors in that space are doing silicon photonics, but it 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 really in like in a CFP2 format, you can probably do both of them. I think the other benefits of silicon are probably a bigger factor than the power.
Okay. Let's switch gears slightly. So tell me more about the DSP. That was the second part of my conversation with Tom Williams. Next time, we'll get into understanding coherent optics. Follow us on Apple Podcast and leave a review, or subscribe on whatever podcasting platform you use. You may see the Cisco Podcast Network come up when you search for Cisco Optics Podcast. That's where we live, and you can find other great podcasts there too. And we'd really appreciate you helping to get the word out. Share this with friends and colleagues that come to mind when you think of network technology and optics. Also, check out the Cisco Optics blogs at blogs.cisco.com and search on hashtag Cisco Optics blog, no spaces and no hyphens. We also have this podcast and educational videos on YouTube. Just go to youtube.com and search on Cisco Optics. Thank you for listening. This is Pat Chow, Product Manager at Cisco Optics. The next episode is part 3 of my conversation with Tom Williams. Until next time.